Rahul Shivshankar, author, consulting editor, Network 18, in conversation about his book, Modi and India, 2024, and the Battle for Bharat. We have the book in our bookstall. You can purchase it. This conversation is with Anand Ranganathan, scientist, SCMM, author, political commentator.
Side you prefer? I've already mentioned this twice. Yeah. Hi, good evening. If you aren't already sick of the sight of me, can I just remind you that I have another session tomorrow? Thank you, Alo. Oh, really? Hi, good evening, everyone. It's again a real pleasure to be back on the stage again, but this time it's a double pleasure because I've got great Rahul Shivshankar, who's a very dear friend, one of the most objective commentators who happens to be in journalism around. So it's an absolute joy, Rahul, to have you. And for us to discuss something that I personally feel has been discussed threadbare, and I think Rahul, possibly you might have the same perception as well. When Rahul wrote this book, it was sent to the publishers in early 2024, I think?
23.
2023, so it was before the 2024 elections. And of course, it was a kind of a lot of, I would say, psychological aspects of the way Modi thought and how the battle for Bharat or / India lay ahead. Now, suffice it to say that that battle was won by Modi with the help of a few non-BJP ministers, I would say. So can we spend the next half an hour, 40 minutes discussing, gleaning from the psychological aspects that you gained, Rahul, while writing that book, and the nature of the political beast that we have amongst us in terms of politics in India and how Modi has negotiated or circumvented it. Can we use that knowledge and gaze in the crystal ball as to the battles that lie ahead? Because personally, I think the battles that lie ahead in the very near future, in the next 4 or 5 years, are just, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at them with trepidation. So can we do that?
Yeah, sure. So the one thing that sticks with me is that you should never judge a book by its cover. This is not a Rajdeep Sardesai kind of account of going around town and to different cities and capturing the corner shop gupshup and
Sorry, who?
what goes on in some of the power corridors, and then you write this, syrupy account of an election. This is the absolute opposite. And a lot of people actually who only read the cover come away thinking this is going to be some rollicking account of how Modi spun the election in his favor by going out there campaigning in this way and using that stratagem. It's actually a completely different book. And the reason it is not a book that tells you what it is on its cover is because the brief changed 2 months before the election. So the book actually is a riposte to what Shashi Tharoor and others on what we call the sort of so-called, we're all liberals, so I don't know why, we have to sort of suggest that they are on the liberal side of the fence, but that book actually is a riposte to his one standard, or what Pratap Bhanu Mehta and others, or Suhash Palshikar in their articles constantly talk about, that under Modi, India is becoming a Hindu Rajya. Not just a Rashtra, but a Hindu Rajya, that the constitution will be changed. That is what Rahul Gandhi had been saying. He walks around, as you know, with a constitution's copy, and he says, these guys are going to change the constitution. And they're going to rewrite it in their own philosophy, their own ideology, and we are going to become a nation where Muslims or other minorities will be pushed to the sidelines. So it's an entire tracing of how that actually is completely a lie. And I go into history, I go into the past, I talk about the roots of our great philosophical moorings, which were very universalistic, also extremely, the word now is very fashionable, is pluralistic. So I trace from our Dharma, etc., our story, and then I go into how, in one particular aspect, we were an extremely democratic country. See, let me be very honest with you. There were many states that were colonized, as you all know. And a large number of them were aspiring to be democracies, liberal democracies. How many of those states actually are sustained democracies? You look at Africa, I think apart from, maybe Kenya to some extent, most have become trenchant. The word that is fashionable and used about us is electoral autocracy. They've all become electoral autocracies. In fact, in our own neighborhood, only South Korea is actually a fully fledged democracy. India remains one. And you could say Japan is the other. So all these post-colonial states, only three. And what sets us apart is that we're the poorest amongst them. And as you know, there were many people who said that we can never be a democracy because the three or four things that basically make democracies is a bourgeoisie, a middle class, a certain income level, and that actually allows you to have, the wherewithal to be democracies. But India defies all of that. It's quite exceptional. Neither do we have, as the previous speaker was saying, neither were we really had a concept of what our nationhood is really. We were so at each other's throats throughout our history, we didn't have a concept of a larger idea of Bharat. So we're a miracle, actually. And we have to ask ourselves why. So this book goes into that, explores not just our democratic roots, but our pluralistic roots, and then posits that at best we could become what England is really, even if we were to alter our constitution, is what England really is, which is a religious state. It is, as you know, an Anglican country, but we would be very pluralistic because of the nature of our Hinduism, our Hinduness, which makes us extremely open. So the book sort of follows and then predicts what will happen in the future and makes a couple of bold assertions that we need to develop a national spirit built around a flag, built around our Dharma. And then goes on to say that actually, when people say that nationalism is very bad, actually we need to develop a national spirit to survive. Actually, nationalism is good because what has our experience taught us, Doc? All the great empires collapsed. The Soviet Union collapsed because they could not define their idea of who they were around one flag, on one idea. Pretty much, I think Europe perhaps could turn into a borderless sort of state entirely and become a more sort of bastion of democratic liberalism in the modern sense, and therefore a larger nation. But everyone is struggling with that.
Yeah. No, I'd rather not comment on nationalism because I once wrote an article why nationalism is bad and why Indians aren't nationalists but patriots. Yeah. But in any case, it's a very interesting point you make, Rahul, because when you say that it's a miracle, and I agree with you that we are a democracy, and you chart out the reasons in saying that the characteristics that make a democracy, middle class and all those things, we didn't have them. But of course, the strange thing is that all those characteristics are also present in a lot of countries that are dictatorships. So it's very difficult to kind of pinpoint the characteristics of a country that make it a democracy. It's one of those things. But as I said, if we move forward, because that battle is won, I would like to discuss with you the real difficult battles that lie ahead. And they really are very difficult battles for us to negotiate. And I have kind of narrowed down on 3 battles that I would talk about, and I encourage you and the audience as well to think of more battles. The first couple of battles that I'll talk about, the third one is the civilizational battle, and then we can spend some time on it. The first couple of battles that lie ahead immediately are triggered by Trump. In fact, he's just triggered one, so let's kick off with that battle, Rahul, just yesterday, about the H-1B thing. Now, history tells you that American companies cannot thrive or survive without H-1B talent. And the thing about talent is that it can't be shackled for too long. I mean, real talent would express itself anywhere, Bangalore if not Boston, Surat if not San Fran, provided the conditions are there in Bangalore and Surat to absorb that talent. So, strange that it might be Trump who's kind of ended up unleashing the potential of India in a way that no other Indian politician could or can. In fact, he just might end up making India great again. So, what are your views on this battle? Because many are, of course, looking at this entire thing, because 75% of all the H-1B visas were given to Indians, and a lot of Indians, of course, go to America. And we're hearing a lot of stories since yesterday that some Indians who were on H-1B and were, in fact, about to visit India were on the plane from US to India when they heard about this Trump's announcement, and they immediately deboarded. What are your views about how India, I mean, am I correct in assessing that this could be a boon, or am I wrong here?
Well, there are 2 things. First of all, let me just put a few things in perspective. It's funny that we should look at Trump as the trigger. The trigger point was actually 5 years ago, when Trump first came in on the back of a man who was sketching his plan called Steve Bannon. So Bannon, protectionism in America has been a 100-year project, let me tell you. The Monroe Doctrine was the first protectionist enterprise. And it is, over a period of time, because of the sort of slightly more Atlanticist agenda, sort of spluttered. And the reason was profit. American companies wanted to make profit. But just cut to the chase, for 3 years, the H-1B visas, the numbers to Indians has been falling. In fact, last year, Biden's last term, the last 6-8 months, the number of H-1B visas issued to Indians was already down by 37 to 38%. That's a significant drop, but we never made a big noise about it because Biden never made a big noise about it. 37%, that means 30%, 37% of those Indians that were getting the share of those H-1B visas never actually got to US shores.
Now, is that because American companies are recruiting Americans, or American companies have put up their shops in India?
So if you look at it, yes, one of the reasons is because American countries started offshoring or nearshoring or moving out of China, for example, after COVID, and started setting up shops. So that process that we are sort of looking at right now, this particular hit that we're looking at right now and saying it's an existential crisis, I think that has already played out a lot. And it hasn't hit what many people would say was, the incomes that were being sent back, the remittance economy. Even that hasn't been missed too much. I think fundamentally the problem is that we've had many, many years of a lopsided view where we focus really on imports and not really on producing and exporting. So that is a fundamental problem where we did not manufacture. Our entire approach has been we're open for business, and I know you'll come because we have the poor labor here that's going to work at, basic prices, and we've got a lot of resource. You'll definitely have to come here because that's, the normal sort of way you would believe that capital moves today to poorer markets where costs of production is much lower. And we would obviously be the first shop that people would knock on. That hasn't happened. Vietnam, Bangladesh, others, of course, now Bangladesh, the basket case, but these were certain economies that were moving and getting that sort of business.
I'll come to that aspect. That's the second battle that I had in mind. The first one was
my point
brain
is,
related.
no one, including Mr. Modi, has been the reformist that they projected themselves to be.
That's the third battle that I was talking about.
40,000 compliances are needed, to set up a business in India. If you move a spittoon, for example, in your factory, or if you didn't have 6 in a particular row, 25 feet apart, this, that, the other, someone could come in and ask you a few questions, and they're not going to be pleasant questions. I mean, it's that draconian. So, you had constant red tape. And even Mr. Modi, for all his well-intentioned outlook, as far as India is concerned, hasn't been able to break the back of that bureaucracy. The corruption today is the corruption that you and I face. You try and go to a driving school, you'll get sort of lessons, you'll go to the window and you'll say, let have my, driving license. They'll look at you askance. They'll say, nahi, aapne ye test fail kar diya. It's all, Or if you want a passport, they'll come to your house, they'll do that background check where the guy will say, something is missing, sir. You want to expedite the process. Give us a couple of thousand rupees. You want Aadhaar, how that goes. I mean, so that's the level of corruption that exists, which actually strangles. And you can imagine if that happens, gratuitously Piyush Goyal talked about the fact that, you see, our startups are not employing local, this, that. You remember all that? They don't have the big ideas and all that. A lot of people said, well, what have you done to enable? You can't get land in this country. And I have this theory, which has sort of struck me in China when I was there. I see these, in America, you see these grand highways that stretch for miles. You don't even have to look right or left. In China, you have these massive highways, 7, 8 lanes that stretch for miles, straight as an arrow. And I realized, why is it that these countries have these very straight, absolutely dead straight highways, and they zoom on for miles? Why? Because land acquisition happens very easily. In America, it was the reverse of China. In America, the roads were built, and then people came to live on either side of the roads, and cities were built. In China, it's the other way. The state just says, we want all this, and we can ride roughshod over hundreds of people. Here, our roads have to go around people, buildings, land, other stuff. So projects
sometimes
take years.
They go around lampposts, so it's right in the middle of the
exactly.
road as well. Yeah.
Or mazhars and
But I'll come to those issues that you've tackled. But the first one was purely concerning H1B, because that's, in many ways, we've been talking about this for decades now, because that's like, you can say, the crown jewel of India. We talk of the definitions now that have become popular: Vishwa Guru, educating India's real, you can say, feather in the cap is educating the world. So this thing about brain, our brain is running the world. America is running on our talent. So that's the first battle. Now, let's look 2 or 3 years ahead. H1B is dead. I mean, if this is not struck down by a court, companies simply are not going to spend $100,000 to get one person to fly to America. And then I think every time there is re-entry, they would have to possibly, I've not read the exact clauses. Now that the H1B is dead, are we ready to absorb all those brilliant people who were already in America or abroad, who would be now, coming back to India? And B, because a lot of brilliant talent is, of course, created in India every year. And that cream used to go away. are we ready to absorb that? I'm not talking of the roads and the corruption here. Have we constructed ecosystems in Hyderabad, in Bangalore, in Pune? We call them Oxford of the East and this and that, Silicon Valley. Is India ready to absorb these geniuses?
I think the statistics tell you the story, and it's a grim one. What is the one thing that is lagging in our country right now? It's private investment. Private capital is not coming in and putting money down. I was reading this very interesting piece. If you put money, for example, in the stock market, it's just today morning actually, a year ago, how much do you think we made on that money? Can anyone hazard a guess? Zero. So that's what the stock market gave you, zero. Why? Because money was going out and a lot of people are hedging because of this overhang of tariff, etc., etc. Your currency is taken a walloping. Private capital for the last 3 years has been gun shy. The finance minister said so in her budget. She says, look, I'm putting in a lot of money by CAPEX, but I need you guys now to walk the talk. They're not coming in. Year after year, we were told that we are going to create 2 crore jobs a year. Have those jobs been created? We were told that farm incomes would double. As I said, has that happened? No. Why? Because the farm laws that would have actually added that massive growth and, animal spirits would have been revived in rural India. It's not happened.
Yeah, so I'm just saying about the H1B battle.
So
I'll come to all of those.
If who's going to create the space
the
to
ecosystem?
absorb? Who's going to create that space to absorb? It's private capital, right? They have to create the industries or the software companies. Sorry,
But
you're going to have a problem.
Do you foresee, for example, now Apple is manufacturing in Bangalore. What if Apple also decides to shift its the intellectual and brains behind what constructs a mobile phone, an Apple phone, to Bangalore, to Hyderabad? Let's say Google also shifts its thinking part of the
Dr.
company.
Ranganathan, look, here is the question. The Chinese arm twisted us 5 months ago when they pulled out their high qualified technicians from Foxconn. You remember? So we shouldn't have actually broken into a sweat because we have so many big brains who could have stepped in. But what were we doing? We panicked. So it answers your question. A, why were people lining up outside American embassy? And I pass that every day and dropping my daughter to school. And I always tell my wife, she says, why do you pass this little lane and get stuck there for a good 10 minutes? Because I say, I like to see who's actually applying for these visas. It's for me a sociological study. And the day those lines dry up, I will know that India has now got the capacity to retain that talent.
I think before we switch on or go to the next battle, just so that we keep it fresh in the minds of the audience, is there anyone who has been on H1B who would like to ask a question, or anyone from the tech industry who would like to comment on this before we go on to the next battle? Any person would like to give his or her views on this H1B battle, the battle of the brains?
And let me also tell you one other thing, that yes.
Yeah.
My cousin living in the US citizenship, working as a software engineer. So she said now a lot of the jobs, which were being outsourced to Indians, is now going to Africa. So that is becoming
that is
a
the point.
source.
You've just preempted what I was about to say. Ireland is very competitive. Not island as in, island, but Ireland. Africa is getting into the game. The Emirates are getting into the game. Southeast Asia is getting into the game. A large number of Southeast Asian countries now by perforce are teaching their children how to speak in English. My son right now is in Cambodia and he was telling me a few things just the other day. But there's another problem. It's just not H1B in America. It's immigration control that is also beginning to hurt us. So the number of students, and I tweeted this morning, it's an eye-opening fact. The number of students going to America to study, down by 46% over 2 years. So where are they going? Germany.
Yeah. Oh.
So all I'm trying to say is that we're living in times when people are raising their, nationalisms are now playing into the equation, and people are raising their sort of barriers to the flow of people.
And it's kind of perplexing because 10 years ago we had 350 startups and today we have 130,000 startups. So clearly, you can call them baby steps or whatever, we're moving in that direction, but the question is of speed, of absorbing brilliant talent. I was never against brain drain because when you believe in energy minimum, let the brain settle wherever that brain wants, and of course it would help everyone. That's the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam to begin with. But right now, if the brain is to be ejected from a country, then we must have ways to absorb that. And I think we really need to work hard on that.
Absolutely.
Coming to the next battle, which is connected, again, triggered by Trump, on the tariff business. Now, the Prime Minister said, I will do everything to protect my farmers. To which the retort would be, what exactly are you trying to protect? Are you trying to protect a defunct sector that occupies or that takes up almost 44% of our active labor force of 300 million people and contributes only 14.5% to our GDP, where everything is from production to purchase is medieval, when we can't store 50% of the food grains that we produce, where 70 million tons of what we produce goes waste every year. Everything is laced with pesticides. We have the lowest food export refusal, highest food export refusal rate in the world. We have one of the lowest quantities of food grains that we produce per hectare. So many things are wrong. Now, if we have to be competitive, we have to realize that high tariffs on agriculture is just the opposite of what we should be doing. We should be de-protecting this sector. But, we are trying to protect it. Now, is that a battle that we've already lost before it's even begun?
Absolutely. Look, it's not just agriculture. We, on an average, pay 18% more for the cars we drive than we should be. Why? Because we have protected that industry. So the tariffs are actually high. They're high because we think we're doing ourselves a favor, because the nature of the polity is so devised that we are actually, in one sense or the other, a clandestine sort of oligarchy, where there are very few who actually retain the means, and it's their influence that they wield that allows them to continue holding on to their space. So we actually haven't really moved beyond, these great...
The thinking is of Ambassador Carr.
Yes, so it is a feudalism where the court comes in. That's why everyone constantly looks at who's going to be the prime minister and the dispensation. Dispensation is very important. Whether you're at the village level or you're at a high sort of industrialist level, all those organizations are looking at who is in power, because the gravy train flows from who is in power. So, unfortunately, you cut side deals, and we saw that. I mean, look, I'm not a fan of the way our democracy, elections are great, but look at the way they're funded. Doctor, just follow the money trail. And if you really look at it, you see, why is it that so many industrialists are putting this money in? What must be the payback? The payback is these favors. I'll tell you something. I come from an industry, my heart was in print because I started my career in print. India pays the highest amount. Indian newspapers for newsprint. I don't think you know this. And for years, I know that the owners of newspapers have gone and begged the INB minister, begged the so-and-so to say, please lower the cost of newsprint so that we can actually print newspapers at a lower cost. It becomes a exercise where we can save these costs and put them where? In the pockets of journalists who can actually go out there and do good journalism, report. You see, when COVID happened, the entire media began to get more reliant on government because everyone stopped giving advertisements. And there was a minister who told me, actually, I was shocked, told me that this is a great blessing for us in more ways than one. So I said, why? He says, आप समझोगे 1-2 साल के बाद. Because if the media is not getting enough money, who do they become more dependent on? You see the thinking.
So it is still a My Baap Sarkar.
It's a My Baap Sarkar attitude. That's why people, and you see it now, who is giving the doles? First, governments were criticizing this whole culture, reverie culture. Now those reveries have been given. You yourself pointed it out on the show. By whom?
Yeah.
Today in Bihar, every single day a reverie is handed out. In Delhi it was the case, to the point where I don't think that big promise of paying the women a certain stipend has even been fulfilled now. In Maharashtra,
No, I mean, the strange thing was when even Kejriwal was surprised by the freebies BJP was promising. That really takes the cake. So to end that, so first battle that we discussed was the battle of the brains, where you kind of very pessimistic as to whether we'll be able to
well,
win
in the
it.
short term I am.
Yeah.
Because
The second
those lines haven't dried up
Yeah.
till yesterday. Maybe tomorrow they will, but till yesterday they weren't. So obviously people were dying to get out. Who doesn't want to get out?
So the second battle is the battle of protectionism. There again, you are a bit despondent because we are not going to mend our ways because of political expediency or whatever.
Well,
it
I
may
mean,
be.
you saw that farm laws, we batted for them. We thought this time the government is going to go with it. And what happened? 2 years later, we all had eggs on our face.
And when you talk of tariffs, when you talk of protectionism, you brought in, those compliances. In fact, Gautam Chikarmene, who you know, has written that book, Jailed for Doing Business, and it's not 40,000, it's 65,000 compliances.
Well, apparently they brought down a few.
Oh, they brought.
So I'm giving credit where it's,
Right.
20% or whatever. I'm not great at maths, but I think it comes to about 30% of the
Right. But
compliance.
you were right about the spittoon thing. It's
Yeah.
still covered by Factories Act of 1948. I mean, the point is, if we ourselves are a high protectionist regime, we are not competitive. We are not making products that are the best in the world that the world would buy, and hence we would discourage great product come to us. It's the same Ambassador Campacola mindset, Now let me quickly come to the third battle before Gloria rings the bell again, and that is the battle of geopolitics. That is the battle of securing our energy needs. How do you think we would fare going ahead? Now, I personally think we've done brilliantly by looking the bully in the eye when EU and the West, didn't want us to buy Russian oil. We not only bought Russian oil, we saved $26 billion in buying it. We capped our inflation, and we've increased the purchase of Russian oil this month. But going forward, you can see the hardening stand. I mean, Trump was possibly conciliatory in his silly tweets, but he also is, trying to prod the EU in having sanctions against, How do you see us going forward? Would we continue to look the bully in the eye, or would we succumb?
I think that's going to be a problem in the long run. You look at where the rupee is. I think the rupee is now at 88. It's lost, I think, every month 3 or 4% against the dollar.
It's faring better than other currencies
Actually
against
not.
the dollar.
Actually not. The Japanese have rebounded. We were planning to go, and I was looking at the currencies.
All those who've done trade deals with Trump, they are faring better.
The euro has rebounded. There's about 8 or 9 top currencies that have rebounded. So what happens when your rupee weakens to the point where it's now at what it is? Your imports, your energy imports are going to be more expensive. That'll have a knock-on effect on, guess what? Inflation. Your exports are not doing that brilliantly. You need to find those new markets because the tariff walls are up in the US. So you have $40 billion, stuck somewhere. You got to find those markets. You're not going to be able to sustain this. Something has to give. And I feel that we're in a very tough spot right now. Unless we can miraculously crack open different markets. So we're now having to get into European Union, trying to expedite that. We've just signed a bilateral with the UK. We're trying now with some African countries, etc., bilateral level, some ASEAN countries. This is fundamentally a problem, Doctor. This is not an easy situation. We're walking a very, tight rope. And I can only hope that the CA knows a lot more than he's letting on, because he recently said that I think that penalty is going to go sooner than later. That means that we have to make some concessions somewhere, isn't it? So let's see. The Russians will be under pressure if this war doesn't end sooner than later. You've already had a coming together now of Trump and China. Why is Trump actually cornering us? Because if he makes up with China, he doesn't really need us for a while. If he's transactional, what were we really? We were supposed to be the counterfoil to China. But if that relationship mends, whether it actually works in American interests or not, he believes so. I don't think so. But our views or other people who are speaking to him, or at him rather, believe that. But he's very convinced that he needs the Chinese equation to work out well. They're meeting, in fact, in the next 7-8 days. We'll see how that goes.
In fact, somebody was talking about when, everyone's quoting the fact that the US has a $40 billion deficit with trade with India. But in fact, it is India that has a deficit because there are a lot of things that Indians spend in America that are not counted in the...
All these companies, they're making thousands of crores out of India. I just put out that number. I now forget. It's 2 lakh crores or something like that.
Right.
Just
6
5
top,
of them. The 6 or 5 of them. 2 lakh crores. That's what they're taking back. It's like the East India Company, right? They don't deposit it here. We, in fact, should ask them to pay a certain tariff. But we don't have the guts to do that because guess what will happen? They'll draw down and who loses? You see, right now, Indian IT companies have been laying off people in India. So it comes back to that question, are we going to be able to absorb these people? No, unless they come with some money from somebody, they're backing, they have the expertise and set up shop here.
And I think when Mr. Piyush Goyal was talking about that, China is making semiconductors, we are having delivery boys. Well, we need to look inwards as well. 75% of Indian labor force is unskilled, actually unskilled. And there were some reports that 80% of the Indian engineering graduates are unemployable, not unemployed, but unemployable. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to end on a despondent, pessimistic note, but the 3 battles we talked about, I think tough days ahead on all 3. Is there any battle that you are confident that we might win going ahead?
I think the government is going to get its act together. There are 4 years left for Mr. Modi. He's not the kind of person who doesn't consider the legacy factor. I think he wants to leave a legacy. He wants to go down in history. And I think in these next 4 years, you're going to see him pushing the envelope a little bit. And it'll take time. But I think we've finally learned that, and he in fact made a big speech today, maybe oblique reference to what is happening. He's got very sharp and astute political antennas. There's a gentleman who's benefited from his vision, who's just walked in. The great Subhanshu Shukla is here with us. Hi, how are you? So, upwards and onwards, upwards and upwards. I think that's the motto. So, I think He's brought in some cheer. We were going to end on a despondent note.
I know.
But if you can take us to a new orbit, I'm suppose, we're looking good.
I think the battle of space we might win with.
Yes. There are things, but
But when you talk about he
Atmanirbharta-
wants to leave a legacy.
So he talked about this. He said the only way we're going to be able to beat this is if we become self-reliant. And he made an invocation to us all as citizens. Forget these petty, nonsensical, agenda-driven arguments. Put your heads together. Make India great again. That's what he said.
But Rahul, again, these are
shibboleth,
words and
yeah.
slogans that he's used for the last 8-9 years. Atmanirbharta, I remember.
But look, it's not been all bad. Look, we've just ended our quarter at 7.8%. I know, and all of this in the face of headwinds.
Yeah.
So something is happening. We need to ensure that all of us actually, look, I mean, the one thing that I realized when I went to China, and I'm going to get into trouble because someone got into trouble, I think it was Amitabh
China,
Khan.
I really don't want to compare
No,
because
don't. But
those guys is...
But there is one thing that they have, which is that they have a unity of purpose. Now, I don't believe that all of that has been whipped into shape, to be honest. Because even the whippers,
Pakistan has a unity of
because
purpose.
I don't think so.
No, I mean,
they're only
I don't want to
unity.
mention their their purpose is, but
that's it. So I'm talking
they're unified in
in a
that.
grand, I mean, look, 20 years ago, they started thinking about rare earth metals. I was telling Lindy, my wife, in the plane, I said, look at where these guys were 20 years ago. Today, the world is playing catch up. Europe now wants to set up one of the biggest manufacturing. The US wants to do it, this, that, the other. 20 years. That means that even the people who are sort of calling all the shots have some purpose or a sense of purpose. It's about destiny.
And we haven't even talked about the fourth battle, which is, in fact, Shalja, my colleague, and I talked about it yesterday about the AI, the impact of AI, on science in particular. But I mean, that is a battle where India has to play an absolute prominent role, otherwise we'll be dust. I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes left. So if there are any questions, if you can name another battle that we can take Rahul's opinion on.
Perhaps it's like a little use case that's slightly different from the H-1B visa, wherein I'm not talking about a job offer from the US, but in my case especially, what I'm trying to do is get funding to do my own projects, to do my own work. Now, automatically, like whoever else I know has gotten funding in the same line of work, which is conservation, filming, photography. I have not heard any of them talk about an Indian organization funding them. And I just wanted to know if the answer for why this ecosystem or this ethos isn't there in India is something that you have already spoken of, or could you elaborate a little more to explain how it's all coming from outside India?
I think fundamentally we've talked about the reasons why there is hesitation. I didn't get your name. Sanjay. So Sanjay, that's one of the problems, that private capital is just not moving in. And you have to ask yourself why. And I think those answers were supplied in long tweets to the Commerce Minister when he made those sort of gratuitous comments. I think we just got to have to look very, we have to sort of read between the lines. The government and many governments across the board, and look, this is not just about the failings of the NDA. I mean, opposition runs about, 10 states? Have they turned those into even countries as prosperous that have double, GDP per capita like Thailand? No. None of those states are doing well either.
Opposition runs 10 states and 10 states run the opposition.
10 states run the opposition. So they're not doing anything
but
better either.
this thing about investment, yes, is very perspective.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
We're done.
Because when you look at the percentage of GDP that India spends on R&D, it's about 0.7%. The lowest amongst the BRICS nations. In America is about 4%, Korea is about 6%. But that's not telling the entire story. The point is that the amount that Indian government spends on R&D as a percentage of GDP is the same as the American government spends on R&D. But our private companies are not spending the money that American private companies are spending. Same is the case with Korea. So in many cases, yes, Indian government is at fault, but what you say is absolutely true. The private players have to step up. And, they have to start, I think the time is now, because this is the battle that needs to be won, especially with AI and everything. One last question before, the bell hasn't yet tolled, so... Oh,
May
Gratify,
I'm a little bit confused at the end of your talk. A lot of divergent opinions. At one end, you said we are a functioning democracy, but you said that we are sort of a pseudo-oligarchy. Second
No.
thing, you said that America has had 100 years of protectionism, but that has made them the most prosperous country in the world. But if India is protectionist, it is wrong. So India is supposed to be protectionist or not? Are we a democracy? Are we not?
Okay, good questions. Very cleverly put there. I think people have misunderstood what I was saying. The power of the vote to bring about change and accountability remains very strong. That is the foundation of all democracies. I'm talking about governance here. Governance is a different kettle of fish. So don't confuse that with the ability to make change that is in your hands. That vote allows you, and that vote remains free and fair. The people who are ruling us, they're not doing a good job. They could do a better job. There are others who think they can do a better job. There are some who are doing a good job, but they're not being able to sort of push through that vision at various levels of government. So there's a problem there. So it's governance there's a governance deficit. Now you can look for reasons. And look, I mean, if you really want to be objective, this government ended up with 40 seats less this time. Why? So people also then say that, look, you promise, you deliver halfway, we'll also give you halfway then support, which they did. Now, whether that lesson is imbibed by those who are governing us is a different question. So governance and democracy are two different things, right? And what is your second question was about protectionism. Look, protectionism cannot be look, you can obviously have certain industries which are critical strategic industries, which you can sort of say, okay, we'll have guardrails. But automobile sector, agriculture, the reason you protect your agriculture is because you're not industrializing fast enough. So it continues to harbor about 60% of your population. So you're mortified. And what are you doing? Subsidies of all kinds to keep people yoked to the farm. That's not the way forward. Those are the sectors that should be opened up.
And just to end by saying that keep it Darwinian in principle. About protectionism, for example, Japan does not levy any tariffs on American cars. No one in Japan buys American cars. America levies tariffs on Japanese cars, and there are almost as many Japanese cars on American roads as American cars are. So ultimately, people are going to buy the best product for them. I think that's the lesson that we need to learn and be more competitive. I think on that note, before the bell actually rings and scares the hell out of me, thank you so much, Rahul.